There's a lot to notice in the first trailer for Daredevil Born Again. From nods to deeper themes to blink and you'll miss it references, here's everything you might not have caught. As we find out from the get-go, a lot of time has passed since we last saw Fisk, enough time for him to become mayor. For a brief moment, we see Fisk's mug plastered all over Times Square as he gives a citywide New Year's Eve address. If you let your eyes wander down to the crowd, you might notice there are a number of people wearing hats that sport an image that any eagle-eyed MCU fan would instantly recognize, the logo for a company called Pym Van Dyne. Just how will Hope Van Dyne's post-blip continuation of Pym Technologies play a part in Born Again? Being that the company is geared towards changing the world for the better, it's possible that Fisk will have dealings with them as the city's mayor, both for the usual political purposes and also the more villainous kind.
I can't shake the feeling that you're gaming the system.
It's anyone's guess at this point, and it could also just be set dressing to plant us firmly in the MCU. Oh, and get used to this single frame. There are more references packed in here that we'll get into in a bit. As if the fact that the majority of the original cast is returning for Born Again isn't enough to convince us that it's a direct continuation of the long-dormant series, there's a very brief shot that provides another subtle hint. As Fisk and Vanessa cheers each other over dinner, we see his favorite painting, Rabbit in a Snowstorm, chilling in the background. Being that this painting is how he came to meet the love of his life in Season 1, its significance can't be overstated. This goes double for the fact that it now has a fresh splatter of blood all over it, which makes us ask the same question Vanessa asks Fisk the night she meets him at the gallery.
All that matters is, how does it make you feel?
Judging by the blood, we'd have to say that Fisk is feeling more violent than he's ever felt before. Another piece of evidence that hints at Born Again being directly connected to previous MCU installments and not just some nebulous reboot lies within that single frame of Times Square we brought your attention to earlier. If you look at the upper left portion of the screen and squint your eyes a bit, you can see an ad for Harlem's Paradise, the nightclub owned by Buggy Stokes and Quincy McIver and Luke Cage. Though Cage never made an appearance in Daredevil, he did become pretty well acquainted with the Man Without Fear and the Defenders, so this little Easter egg definitely hints at the fact that he might be popping up to lend his fists to the fight in Born Again. While there are plenty of tiny details to take note of with your eyes in the trailer, there's also a little treat for your ears. Hear that? Yup, in the latter half of the trailer, we can hear the original Daredevil theme being played on a church organ. This is fitting in more ways than one. Of course, it ties in perfectly with the overarching theme of Catholicism that plays a huge part in Matt's approach to fighting crime.
I was raised to believe in grace.
It also plays into the Born Again wording, which is a nod to the Christian idea of finding God again after steering clear of him for a time. So yeah, the religious undertones are even more abundant this time around. As we'll mention a few times more throughout this video, it's obvious that the showrunners took a lot of inspiration from the comics this time around. Being that Fisk has risen to the rank of mayor in Born Again, it's very likely that a good portion of the show will also be drawing from the Mayor Fisk run that stretched from Daredevil issues 595 through 600. The most direct nod to this run is the Times Square frame, which was lifted directly from issue 595. It also looks to be drawing somewhat from the Devil's Reign story, which ran from December 2021 to May 2022. One of the main plot points revolves around Mayor Fisk putting together a group of supervillains in the hopes of eradicating costumed vigilantes in the city once and for all. Based on the Born Again trailer alone, it's hard to tell if they're going to cram in as many hero-villain appearances as there are in the comic, but we're here for it, no matter how much or how little they actually ended up drawing from it. Yes, there are plenty of old faces to recognize in the trailer, but there are a few new ones to take note of as well. Or should we say a few new masks. The first one belongs to Muse, who you might not be aware of if you're not familiar with the comics. He's a pretty sadistic supervillain, having first appeared in the 11th issue of Daredevil Volume 5. A serial killer who likes to create art via acts of violence and terror, such as a mural painted with the blood of over 100 people, he wears a white costume clad with eye holes that are soaked with blood. We only see him for a split second in the trailer, but it's enough to confirm his identity. The second belongs to White Tiger, another character that only fans of the comics will likely recognize right off the bat. Debuting in 1975 as Marvel's first Latino superhero, White Tiger's real name is Hector Ayala. In short, he's a college student who discovers an amulet that grants him the power of an ancient being known as the Tiger God. Note that there are other iterations of White Tiger, both male and female, that have appeared in subsequent Marvel comics, but the cast listing confirms that the late Camar de los Reyes appears as Ayala in Born Again. Like Muse, we only see him for a flash in the trailer, and it's hard to tell what exactly his arc might be. Being a lawyer and a superhero, the Man Without Fear is definitely a busy guy, but he's never afraid to make room in his life for a little romance. Matt has had a handful of intimate relationships since the original show debuted in 2015. First, there was Claire Temple, a night shift nurse who got close with him after becoming his go-to patcher-upper in Season 1. Then, of course, there was Elektra Natchios, an old flame he reconnected with in Season 2. He had a thing with Karen Page as well, but it never got too far. And don't forget that he had a little fun with Jennifer Walters, aka She-Hulk.
Morning.
In the Born Again trailer, we get a few quick shots of his newest squeeze. The first glance shows them dancing together, while the second shows them having a good time in the shower. It's hard to tell from the trailer alone, but it's been confirmed that this is none other than Heather Glenn, another character from the Daredevil comics. We aren't sure exactly how big of a role she's going to play in Born Again, but it's important to note that she does eventually become Matt's fiancé in the comics. There's a lot more to know beyond that, but we aren't here to drop any spoilers. Not today, anyway. Okay, as promised, we're going back to that single frame of Times Square. Told you there'd be more. Turns out, there's another Easter egg that can be found directly below the Harlem's Paradise ad, a poster for Rogers the Musical. A Broadway production about the life of Steve Rogers that we see in the Hawkeye series, this is yet another piece of evidence that hints at Born Again being connected to the MCU in a variety of ways. It's doubtful that this will end up being integral to the plot, but it's still a fun nod nonetheless. One more thing to notice in that Times Square shot is an ad that sits directly to the right of the Rogers the Musical poster. You have to squint especially hard, and maybe even manipulate it a bit in Photoshop to see it clearly. It's an ad for the Pingo Dosi soda from The Incredible Hulk. You know, the one that did a number on Stan Lee.
Wow.
This isn't the first time the green soda has reappeared in Marvel installments. It appeared at least in set photos from 2015's Ant-Man, a different Times Square billboard in What If, and it also showed up in 2024's Deadpool and Wolverine. Barely. You can also get it in real life at the Pym Test Kitchen on Avengers Campus at Disneyland. I mean, if you want. Being that it shows up in the Born Again trailer, not to mention the fact that Tim Blake Nelson is coming back in Brave New World in a new villainous role, it looks like the Incredible Hulk is having quite the unexpected renaissance in the MCU.